Hi, I'm Chuck Joyner, and this is Mac Voices TV, the talk of the Mac community. He's back once again, folks, this time with a little mood enhancement, Mr. Joe Kissell. This time he's the author of Take Control of CrashPlan. Joe, it's great to have you.
I'll drink to that. Hi, nice to be here.
No, we're not going to get into why you have a drink in your hand. No, we're just going to go because I've been anxious to talk to you about CrashPlan. You and I have talked about it many times. I think it's fair to say, well, I know it is my backup solution of choice, my offline backup solution of choice. I think it's yours too.
Yeah, well, I, as most of your viewers or listeners will know, I have multiple backup solutions running concurrently. I've tested, dozens and dozens of backup programs, and there are, I guess, 4 that I actually use regularly. CrashPlan is definitely one of those. I would say CrashPlan is sort of my main backup. I mean, when you have multiple backups, it's a little bit hard to say which one is really the primary one, but it's the one I think of first if I need to restore a file, and it's the one I rely most heavily on for sure.
The thing about CrashPlan for me is that it can be as simple or I hesitate to say complex, but I guess that's a good word.
Go ahead and say complex.
Yeah, it can go either way. You can set it up very simply, or you can apply varying degrees of granularity down to exactly what you want to back up, how you want to back it up, and where you want to back it up to. And that's one of the big things that appeals to me. And I assume that that's one of the reasons that this book now exists.
Yeah, absolutely. When CrashPlan first appeared on the scene, it was only for online backups, and that was great because online backups to CrashPlan Central were inexpensive, and it was very good for what it did. And then they later added the ability to do local backups to local, just any old hard drive you put in your, attached to your computer or put inside it. But even in the very early days, online backup wasn't just to CrashPlan Central. You could do a backup to a friend or to another computer that you own. So if you have 3 or 4 computers, or you work in an office where there's a dozen computers, then they can all back up to each other. And if you have an office with a computer in it and a computer at home, you can back up one to the other or in either or both directions. Or if you have a friend in another city, state, country, you can back up files to each other's computers. So it's extraordinarily versatile, and it's an easy way of getting both local backups, which are fast to create and fast to restore from, and off-site backups, which are much safer because somebody breaks into your house or lightning strikes or whatever, something happens to your stuff, it's unlikely to affect something that's in another building in another area. So it's a great solution to get multiple kinds of backups all in one package.
Now, you mentioned CrashPlan Central. For the folks that aren't familiar with the CrashPlan universe, what is CrashPlan Central and how do I access it?
Sure. So when you download CrashPlan, and maybe I should just back up a minute and say there are 4 versions of CrashPlan, of which my book talks about 3. So there's CrashPlan, just CrashPlan, which is free and anyone can download it and use it. And you can use this to back up your computer to a local hard drive or to a friend's computer or to another computer, completely free. The only real catch is that it will only run automatically once a day. And although you can run it manually if you want, and it uses a lower level of encryption than the other varieties. Then there's CrashPlan Plus. CrashPlan Plus you pay for, and the amount you pay is based on how much online storage you want. So every version of CrashPlan Plus, or every CrashPlan Plus plan, has some online storage, and you don't have to use it if you don't want to. But you can pay varying amounts to get various amounts of online storage, and that storage facility is called CrashPlan Central. So when you're backing up to CrashPlan's servers, that's called CrashPlan Central. And only CrashPlan Plus can do that. CrashPlan Plus has some other features, though, that are great. One of them is that it backs up continuously, not just once a day, not just once an hour like Time Machine. It just backs up all the time. So whenever a file changes, And you can set a delay if you want, only back up every 15 minutes or whatever it is. But basically, it's just constantly backing up so that there's the least chance that you'll lose any data. So even if you get the very cheapest CrashPlan Plus subscription, where you're hardly storing any data online, you can still use all the other features, the enhanced encryption and other stuff with other computers your own or friends' computers or local hard drives. Then there's CrashPlan Pro. CrashPlan Pro is very, very similar to CrashPlan Plus, except that it's for small businesses. So if you have 10 computers or 100 or 200 computers in your business, you'll use CrashPlan Pro. And CrashPlan Pro has its own cloud storage called Pro Cloud. It's very similar to CrashPlan Central. It's just a different branding for the business stuff and a different pricing structure. And CrashPlan Pro has some features that Plus doesn't, and it doesn't have some features that Plus does because it just sort of picks and chooses what's appropriate for a business environment. But if you have to manage a whole bunch of computers and you want sort of a centralized way to control who's backing up to where and when and how files are restored, CrashPlan Pro is the way to go. So I cover all those versions in the book. There's a fourth version that I don't cover. It's called CrashPlan Pro E. And CrashPlan Pro E looks very much like the other versions, has most of the same features, but this is for enterprises. This is for people with, companies with hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of computers to back up. And so basically you have your own servers doing the backup instead of CrashPlan Central or Pro Cloud. You have your own servers hosting the files. And there's some other sort of back-end differences, but basically it's enterprise stuff, and that's something I don't get into in this book.
We talked to CrashPlan at Macworld, iWorld this year, and I know they had just gotten an additional round of funding to expand even further. This is a company that's been around for a while. It was founded on some very nice, simple principles and methodologies. It's wonderful to see them grow, and at least in my eyes, that lends a lot of credibility, that they're not just Sam's backup program from down the street, that they do have all these things, that they are an enterprise level, and they've made quite a bit out of the fact that they learn a lot from the enterprise level that trickles down to us. They learn a lot from us that gets pushed up to the enterprise level. So they really seem to have their act together.
They really do. I mean, I've known these guys since way back, and I've used the product for about 5 years now. And they have some huge clients. They have, as you said, they just got like $50-some million in funding. They are not going anywhere. They're a big company. They are very well funded. They are very well staffed. They have good, solid technology, and they're nice people too. I mean, they know what they're doing. And they're friendly folks. I've seen backup software come and go. I've seen backup companies come and go. And there are certain products that when people ask me about them, I say, well, yeah, it's an okay product, but I don't know where it's going to be a year from now. And I don't have any qualms about telling somebody to invest their data in CrashPlan because it is going to be around.
It's going to be around, and it also, we've talked about this, you're, at least in theory, about to hand some people that you don't know personally some very critical data of yours. And so you want to make sure that, we've just seen here in the U.S. A big discussion about a payment center that got hacked.
Yeah, I read all about that.
Yeah, something like 10 million credit cards. Now, you're not going to store 10 million credit cards probably, but if it's your credit card, it's just as important. So
that's right. And, one of CrashPlan's big selling points is that they use heavy-duty encryption. Even the free version of CrashPlan that has the less powerful encryption is still strong enough for probably anybody but like the military, it's really good stuff. And when you have the versions with the enhanced encryption, you get to choose how much enhanced you want your encryption to be. So the default method of encrypting your data, I mean, it's always encrypted, but you get to choose sort of how you go about encrypting it. So you can just use your account password, which is the easiest to manage and also the easiest to recover if you lose it. But you can get even more secure by picking a completely separate password that is not your account password, or you can get even more secure still by coming up with a like 76 character key that is like, you know, just a big long key of random characters that, I mean, it's really secure because you have to type that whole key anytime you want to restore a single file. But it's also like unguessable by any computer on the planet in anyone's lifetime, and just, you know, outrageously secure. So security is a really, really big deal when it comes to backups, and I talk a lot about that in the book.
And of course, I think it's appropriate at this time to say, if you do create that key and you do lose it, don't call CrashPlan.
That's right. That's right. CrashPlan can help you recover an account password, the simplest level of encryption. But if you choose your own custom key, it is on you. And I have like big warnings in, you know, big red letters saying, you know, don't blow this off. Make a copy, make another copy, store it in, you know, one password, or, you know, some really safe place. How about a couple of safe places, you know, because this is your data we're talking about. If you lose it, it's gone forever.
And if that sounds like, if you're not paying attention, folks, and that sounds like a negative, that CrashPlan can't help you, no, it's actually a positive.
It's a positive, that's right.
Yeah, because you don't want them being able to recover that. That means they can't get in it. It means that, you know, it's just a bunch of ones and zeros that make no sense until you apply that key. So it's a good thing. Joe, you said something else that I want to touch on before we move on, that CrashPlan can be set to back up continuously.
Right.
I like that idea for a lot of reasons, and I think they're all obvious. The one reason that concerns me, and I think we need to warn people to be a little judicious about it, is that it can suck up bandwidth if you're working with really big files.
Yeah, so there are a couple of issues with bandwidth. I mean, one is that if you're doing something that is bandwidth intensive, that is, you know, streaming movies or, you know, whatever, you know, something that uses up a lot of bandwidth, and CrashPlan is also backing up, then those two things, or however many things, are going to be competing for that you know, that same pipe. So CrashPlan has controls that you can limit how much bandwidth it uses, and you can say, you know, when I'm actively using the computer, you're allowed to use this much bandwidth. And when I'm away from my computer, you're allowed to use this much bandwidth. So it tries to be as gentle on your system, including, you know, bandwidth usage, as possible. Although if you want higher performance, you can obviously bump those numbers up. But there's a different issue, which I have a whole page on, and that is data caps. Because, you know, here in France, I didn't realize how spoiled I am, but in Paris, I have a choice of, I don't know, half a dozen at least ISPs that will give you, you know, either DSL or cable, you know, super fast internet connections with unlimited bandwidth. Data caps just aren't a thing here.
Wow.
Nobody, I mean, for mobile plans, sure. For, you know, a cell phone or something, for an iPad, yes, very much so. But for, you know, a cable or DSL connection, no way. They're you know, suck down as much as you want. So I have no trouble with bandwidth or data caps here, and I really, you know, have become kind of spoiled. But I am aware that my friends and colleagues in other countries don't have it so good, and in some places it's worse than others. I mean, I know that, like in New Zealand, it's particularly bad, and you know, in some places in the U.S. you can get plans with no data caps, and in some places you can't, or they're just super expensive, or you have to go with a business plan or whatever it is. So the unfortunate thing is that if your ISP says, okay, you know, you can have 250 gigabytes of data transfer per month, CrashPlan doesn't have a way to say, okay, well, I'll just stop backing up when I get to 100 gigabytes or when I get to whatever some predetermined level. That's one unfortunate thing, is that it can't do that. You can set various kinds of things to get sort of partway there. I mean, if you do the math, if you say, well, it can only use this amount of bandwidth during these times, and I only select these files, do your little spreadsheet, figure it out. Well, and then there's no way that CrashPlan by itself will be able to back up more than this amount per month. But it's really hard to keep track of, how many movies or TV shows or songs or whatever did I stream, how many things did I download, how much is this all taking up, and so certainly online backups can eat into that if you're not careful. Now, because this is such a big deal, I have all these tips throughout the book on ways of dealing with this. There's not just controlling how much bandwidth CrashPlan uses, but you can also pick, I want to back up these files to this location, but only these other files to another location, using something they call backup sets. You can also take advantage of two very, very important built-in features that are on by default, and you could turn them off if you wanted to, if you were crazy. One of them is called deduplication, which means that it never copies the same data twice. So if you have two identical files, it's not going to copy two files over your broadband connection. In fact, if you have two files that are 99% the same, but just 1% different, then it'll copy one whole file and then only the 1% of the file that's different. So it's very economical on bandwidth that way. And in addition to that, it does block level updates. And so it's not just analyzing whole files, it's analyzing the portion of files. And once it finds that little block, that little tiny portion of a file that it decides, yes, I need to back this up, it doesn't stop there. It compresses that, and then it sends the compressed copy of that block to wherever it is it's going. So with deduplication, block level updates, versioning, and compression, it does as much as any backup program could do to conserve bandwidth.
And you mentioned versioning too, which is something I definitely want to touch on. Folks that are familiar with Time Machine are going to be familiar with this, and certainly now with Lion, you have sort of a simplified version of this. But you can set CrashPlan to save versions of your files so that you can, sorry, Apple, go back in time and recover those as well, which is a really, really nice feature, because while I'm working on one today and I don't want to lose it, maybe I found out that last week's was better, or that I need to go back to it.
Right, and again, the same thing applies because of the way CrashPlan does deduplication and block level updates. The same thing applies to versioning. So if I've just saved a huge file and then I change a little bit of it, it's not going to save the entire file again. It's only going to save the part that has changed, which is something Time Machine doesn't do. And that's really an irritation about Time Machine, is that if you have a 2 gigabyte file and one character changes, it's going to copy the whole file again. And that's not so bad when you're copying to a local hard drive. It's pretty bad when you're copying to a time capsule, and it's terrible if you're copying to an online provider like Dolly Drive, because that just takes forever. So CrashPlan, again, is very parsimonious with your system resources, with your bandwidth. It will when it saves these multiple versions, as many as you like, it only copies the new stuff, and it also does periodic checks to make sure that it has all of the right components, because a file could change many times a day, and so it's done lots and lots of these little incremental block level backups, and so it's constantly checking to make sure, now, are all the pieces still intact? And if it ever finds that it doesn't have all the pieces intact, it's like, okay, hold on, let me go back and get the whole thing again just to make sure. So it takes care of your data.
Yeah, and I don't want to scare people away from online backups with this discussion of bandwidth. It's just something to be aware of. The odds are that unless you're dealing with really big graphics files or really big digital photos or, God forbid, video, you don't have a lot to worry about. Your average keynote presentation, word processing document, spreadsheet, whatever, isn't not that large. You're not going to be in any danger. It's just one of those little things that if you do start playing with really big files, you might get a call from your provider, at least if you're in the U.S. If you're in Paris with Joe, they leave you alone.
There is another option, too, which is you can do an initial backup to a hard drive, and then send that hard drive to either your friend who's somewhere else that you're backing up to the friend's computer, or to CrashPlan Central, and they'll load it onto their servers. And so, at least for that initial huge backup where you're doing a copy of all of your files, you can avoid that huge hit on your bandwidth, and then from there on, just back up whatever has changed. And I, again, have full instructions on how to do that in the book.
Joe, there are two more things I want to make sure we get to, and here's a big one, and that is restore. Because it's one thing to back it up to the cloud, it's another one to get it back from the cloud. Yes. How do you find CrashPlan, and what do you address in the book about restoring your data?
Well, I just want to make a parenthetical comment here. And you know that I love CrashPlan. If I didn't love it, I wouldn't have written a book about it. But it's not the prettiest program in the world. It's written in Java, and so when you're running it on a Mac, it doesn't look like an ordinary Mac app, and if you're running it on Windows, it doesn't look like an ordinary Windows app, and it almost looks like a web page, and some of the controls sort of don't do what you expect them to do. And when it comes to restoring files, I find that the user interface for restoring is particularly I'm trying to think of a good euphemism here. It's just not beautiful, and it's not intuitive. It's not clear. I mean, say what you will about Time Machine, but it has a slick restore interface. So CrashPlan's restore interface is not slick, and in fact, it's really confusing in some ways. If you say, okay, here I'm going to look for this file, and I knew that it was in this folder, and this folder, and this folder. So you sort of navigate down to all these subfolders, like, oh yeah, there's the file I want. You realize, oh no, wait a minute. I want to change something about my search criteria, and you click something to filter your display in a different way, then it completely refreshes the display and it loses all of the selections you've made. So you have to start again, looking for the file. So there are a whole bunch of things like that where it seems to me like the process for restoring files wasn't. I mean, it seems like it was designed by an engineer, like it wasn't designed by a real human being, just by an engineer. And what wasn't really designed with the way ordinary users think in mind. So what I've done in the book is I've said, now look, you probably just really don't want to click that checkbox right there. Trust me on this. You could, and if you did, this is what would happen. But really, don't. And if you're going to do this, and this is probably the better order to do it in, which you wouldn't necessarily think of right away. But the restore interface, I mean, it's completely functional. Don't get me wrong. You can restore one file. You can restore 1,000 files. You can restore, the version from a particular date, or all the versions from a particular date, or from a combination of dates, to the original location, or to a different location, or with the original permissions, or with different permissions. I mean, it's really, really flexible. It's just not obvious. And I mean, it's obvious if you want to do something super, super simple, like, oh, I accidentally deleted this, one word file, so I'm going to go find it. I know it was on my desktop. Okay, there it is. Click, restore, back to my desktop, no problem. If you want to do a really easy thing like that, it's easy. But if you want to do anything trickier, it will help to read the book.
And I agree with you. And you were very eloquent in your description of CrashPlan's interface, because that's sort of the second thing I want to get to, is that while it is an extremely functional program, and I will repeat what Joe said, if we both didn't love it, we wouldn't be here talking about it in this fashion. But because of the power and the granularity that it offers, it does require a little study in trying to figure out what does what, and how many options. There aren't too many options. There are just a lot to let you do anything you want. Joe, how did you address that? I mean, because with all the options,
it's a complex soul. It's someone with, shall we say, a great personality. Maybe not.
I've had blind dates like that, Joe.
Yeah. Maybe not somebody that you look at and go, hey, that is a hot backup program. Now, I can tell you about backup programs that are like that. And then, okay, so I used to have, you remember the TV show Seinfeld, of course. And you remember Elaine, this hot woman who seemed to go out with a lot of guys and seemed to only go out on one date with most of those guys. Because the guy would say, Elaine, yeah, she's really attractive. Yes, I'd like to go out with her. But by the end of their first date, she has annoyed them so much. They're like, yeah, thanks. I can't see past that. I can't get past the irritation to appreciate the hotness, you know? So CrashPlan's, I don't want to say CrashPlan's like Lane. It's actually the opposite of that. There are programs that are like that where you say, wow, this looks so fantastic. It's slick. It's easy to use. And then you start working with it and it's like, oh, yeah, but I can't do this. And yeah, but this turns out to be really hard. CrashPlan's kind of the other way around. It's the plain looking woman that you might not, initially go, oh, wow, yeah. But once you get to know her, it's like, wow, she's really smart and funny too, and does other things. So, but anyway, as you get to know CrashPlan, you'll discover how sexy it really is.
Okay, I'm afraid to go any farther. I guess I was thinking about, Joe, a lot of what you alluded to. You can pick. You're not just going to back up your hard drive. You can pick exactly what folders, even what files you want. You can tell it how much bandwidth to use. You can tell it when to use the bandwidth. You can tell it, don't use any bandwidth. Don't do anything while I'm at the computer. But if you go to bed at 1 o'clock every night and you're asleep until 6 in the morning, you can tell it to just use all your bandwidth and do all the backup chores then. Those are the kind of things that I think make it great. But there's so many of those options. That's why you're going to need to get Joe's book and learn how to use them effectively, because there's so many. Yeah, you can figure most of them out, but it's going to take time, and Joe's already done it.
Right. Well, and I have to say, I learned so much writing this book. I'd have things where I'm like writing about something, and I go, well, what does that do? And I'd look on CrashPlan's website, and the information would not be entirely clear, or some things really aren't documented at all publicly. And so I'd write to my contact at CrashPlan and be like, oh, yeah, that kind of does this weird thing that you'd never think of, and don't do that, do this. And I learned all these sorts of little tidbits and tricks that I would have, even I would have never guessed. So it was really educational. And, sort of the more I learned about CrashPlan, the more I appreciated the care and thoughtfulness that went into the technical aspect of its design. And the more I realized that, just a little bit of makeup wouldn't hurt, But that's okay. That's okay. Your backup software doesn't have to be beautiful. It's like a million times better than command line software. I mean, I can tell you how to use rsync or something, but it's way better than that. I would love to someday to see CrashPlan get a really thorough makeover that is focused on ordinary users with no geeky predispositions whatsoever, and make it as slick and attractive as something like Time Machine is, or I can name a bunch of others, but where anybody would just look at it and go, oh yeah, I get that. And I by the way, I don't mean to imply that CrashPlan is female. I think CrashPlan is like Siri. It is whichever gender you need it to be.
Okay, well, that's an interesting point, especially with the analogies you've been using. The other thing too, Joe, we're talking about it not being the prettiest program, and we're talking about a lot of the sophistication. if you get the book, if you take the time, set your backup strategy the way you want it, hopefully you won't have to look at it for a long time because you won't need your backups. But if you do, then you can go and get it. So, but this is not something that you're going to necessarily be interacting with on a daily, weekly, or even monthly basis.
Yeah, in fact, a friend of mine was complaining to me about how unattractive CrashPlan is, and I said exactly that. I said, well, it's not like your word processor or email program or something that you're going to be using every single day. Under ideal circumstances, you will set it up, you will let it run, and it will just do its thing in the background, and you will only open it on those rare occasions when you need to restore data. And as long as you know what to do when that time comes, and as long as you know how to check in on it every now and then to make sure it's doing the right thing, it really shouldn't matter that it's not as easy to work with as some programs might be.
One other feature that we didn't touch on, and it's a little thing, but it makes me feel warm and fuzzy, is every day I get an email from CrashPlan saying, overnight we successfully backed up, this much. And so it's a good little reminder that, yeah, it's there. I know it's functioning. If anything, and I've had situations where the backup failed for whatever reason, sometimes because of a loss of connectivity, and I get an email that says, we backed up 0 data last night. It's like, okay, that's not right. I need to go and check this out. And so it integrates into your schedule. It doesn't pop up annoying alerts or anything, but it just lets you know it's there, it's doing its job, and thank you very much.
Right. I should point out that those alerts are optional. So if you don't want to always be getting emails, then you don't have to. And not only email, but you can also get your alerts via Twitter or direct messages. So whichever way or ways works for you. And you can even say, when to send or when not to send these messages. And there's just the sort of status, like I will tell you now what has happened in the last 24 hours. But then there are also, if you didn't have any successful backups for X period of time, then you'll get a warning. And then if you didn't get any successful backups for a longer period of time, and you can set, what are the different levels, then you get a more severe warning. I explain, when you might or might not want to use these alerts and warnings, and how to set up the different forms of them.
Yeah, and all those things that we talk about, every time we seem to bring up a feature, Joe, we say, well, you can do this and you can do this. That's why it may not be the prettiest program in the world, but it's extremely functional and extremely powerful. And that's why I have used other online backup programs that I'm not going to name, and I switched to CrashPlan, and I was sorry I ever went the other direction first.
Yeah, I have too, and I get a little bit of guilt from other online backup providers because, and not only other providers, but other, users of other services that really like them. And like, yeah, well, what's wrong with this? Or why don't you like us? And like, well, it's not that. It's not you. Actually it is you. It's, no, it's not you. It's that, this other one's better for me. And there are services that focus on different areas. There are services that focus on simplicity, or there are services that focus on, letting you use Time Machine or letting you use something else that you're already accustomed to. There are services that let you use some other existing backup program, Retrospect or what have you, and then back up to some other type of online storage. And there are advantages to these things, but I think that CrashPlan makes the best combination of compromises. And the online storage is the least expensive that I've ever seen, far less expensive than, for example, Amazon S3. And there are so many other options, whether or not you want to use the online storage. So it's really quite economical. It's, I do make the point in the book that CrashPlan alone shouldn't be thought of as a complete backup solution, because one thing it doesn't do is bootable backups. So it's just not able to copy every single file from your hard drive in such a way that you can boot up from the backup or restore an entire backup to a bootable state. That's still an important thing to do, and you should still use some other backup program to do that. And I have, brief instructions on how to do that in the book. But that's not a it's great for what it does. That's not a criticism. That's a just saying, this is the domain in which it works, and make the most of that. And for this one other thing that you also need, do something else.
Yeah, and I do have reason on one particular online backup service that I had a failure of an important machine at work.
I recall.
And it was not a good thing. And as soon as I could get away, I like CrashPlan. I don't mind telling you who I do like. I like CrashPlan a lot. That's my primary choice. I like Dolly Drive a lot. That's a secondary choice. Beyond that, I tend to do local backups and local offsite backups. In other words, clone to a hard drive and then take it to the bank and put it in a safe deposit box.
Right.
But yeah, CrashPlan, if you want the sophistication and, like Joe said, the cheap storage and everything, it's a great, great choice. Joe, how about the book? How much is the book? Because I know it's pretty cheap too.
Yeah, it's $10. And it's 138 pages or something. Let's see here. Yeah, 138 pages. And so if you already have my big backups book, Take Control of Backing Up Your Mac, then you can Take Control of CrashPlan Backups for $5. And you can upgrade or cross-grade or whatever that is. And you can also buy a bundle of the two. So the big backups book is still really, really useful because it talks about tons of things that I don't get into in the CrashPlan book. It talks about, choosing a hard drive and all the different kinds of special backup situations dealing with, videos and backing up photos and backing up when you're on the road and tons of other stuff. But it only has a couple of pages about CrashPlan. So if you've decided, whether because of reading that book or not, that CrashPlan is the main thing you want to use for backups, then this will give you all the details, and it will really really help you make the most of it, and I'm sure that you will come to love it as we both have.
Yeah, and I do a plug for the books every time, but when you think about the number of hours Joe put into this, when you think about the number of hours you will save for $10, it's a cheap investment, and especially, Joe, I think we talked about backups on this show more than anything else short of maybe the Mac OS itself. Yeah. You and I and all the guests, because they're just so important. So it's another $10 investment in backups. Well worth it.
I think so.
And of course, that's at takecontrolbooks.com. I'll have links in the show notes so you can jump right to it and add it to your Take Control collection.
Right on.
Joe, it's fun as always. We will do it again soon because I know,
Absolutely.
I don't know what it is, but I know you're working on at least one more book.
You think?
Yeah. Not a doubt in my mind.
Yeah.
Folks, this is Mac Voices TV, the talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner, and as always, thanks for listening. Mac Voices TV is part of the Mac Voices Group and a member of Mac Level 10.